Funding for this program is provided by the Pennsylvania Department of Education for Learning at Home.
I'm Mrs. Dowds. I'm so excited to share some information with you and guide you through completing a few fun projects at home with your family. Now, in order to complete these first few projects, you'll need to think like a scientist. How do you think like a scientist? Well, scientists use a combination of the inquiry process and the engineering design process. Those are just two fancy ways of saying how scientists do science. Now, the first way we'll talk about is the inquiry process. Inquire just means that you're curious about something and you ask a question to learn more about it. Next, you make an educated guess or a hypothesis as to what you think the answer might be. Now comes the fun part, the hands-on part, where you actually do an experiment to test your hypothesis and see if you're right. That's called drawing a conclusion, seeing if you're right. The final step is to share the results of your experiment so other people can learn from them too. Another way to think like a scientist is by using the engineering design process. It's just another way of being curious, asking questions, and it starts just the same as the inquiry process. You ask a question that you want to know more about. Then you make a plan and you design a model that's going to help you solve your problem. Now, when you test your model, it might not go as planned. However, that's okay. You keep changing, modifying your model until you get it to work just like you want it to. It might take a couple tries, but that's okay. You're a scientist. That's what scientists do. I'm pretty confident that you're curious kids, so let's go ahead and get started. The first project you'll complete is all about friction. Friction? What's that? Well, let's think for a minute. Have you ever slid across a slippery surface? Maybe a patch of ice? Or maybe you've had your socks on and you slid across a wooden floor. Did you ever try to do the same thing with your shoes on in the grass? Or slide across carpet? Which of those surfaces was easier to slide across? Different surfaces can affect how an object moves, and that's friction, a force that slows an object as it moves. Now, you've heard me use the word surface, and when I say surface, I just mean the outside covering of something. Let's use this ball as an example. The outside layer is the ball's surface. For your project, you'll be designing and building a ramp that's covered with different surfaces. Your job will be to test how an object moves across those surfaces and how friction affects that. Now, later on, I'll show you how to set up your experiment so that you can investigate or find stuff out about how friction affects the movement of objects. The second project you'll be completing is all about force and motion. Now, simply put, force is just the push or pull that makes an object move or sets it into motion. Now, when I think about force and motion, I think about when I was your age and my mom used to push me on the swings, and I'd always yell, "Higher, higher," and she'd push harder on the swing and I'd go in the air. That's force and motion. The force is my mom pushing me on the swing, and the motion is me going higher and higher in the air. Now, for your force and motion project, you're going to create a space rover that's going to travel across the surface of another planet. Now, I've never traveled to another planet, but that's okay. I can use my imagination, I can use pictures that I've seen of different planets, and that will help me as I'm designing and building my rover. Now, when you test your rover, You'll use force. You'll push your rover to set it into motion. That way, you can test the amount of friction that the surfaces cause as your rover travels across them. You'll be asked to do some very important things as you're working on your projects, just like I talked about earlier. You'll be asked to observe and notice what's happening around you. You'll ask questions as to why things happened the way that they did, and then you'll make a plan to solve a problem and predict how you think your plan will work. And finally, you'll share your discoveries. Sometimes you'll write about them, sometimes you'll draw about them, and sometimes you'll discuss them with your family. So stay curious, ask questions, and have fun. That's what being a scientist is all about, and that's how you learn. And my teacher would say, "Okay, boys and girls, take out your math books, it's time for math." I would say, "Ugh, why do I need to know math skills?" But as it turns out, I use math skills every day. When I'm cooking a recipe for dinner, I use math to measure my ingredients. And when I'm knitting a blanket, I use math to figure out how many stitches I'll need to make my blanket. When I go to the grocery store, I use math to figure out how much my groceries will cost and whether or not I'll have enough money. We're talking about thinking like a scientist. Now, another part of thinking like a scientist is using math skills to collect data, which is what you're going to do when you make your ramp and your rover project. Now, one of the math skills you'll use is measuring. Now, this is the piece of cardboard that I'm going to use when I make my ramp. I'm going to show you some tools that you can use to measure and some different ways to measure as you make your ramp. Let's talk about some tools that you can use to measure with. This first tool is a ruler. You might have used this at school, or you might even have a version of this at home. Now, this is a yardstick, which is just a bigger version of a ruler. So it allows you to measure things that are a little bit bigger than just the ruler. Now, this other measuring tool that I have is called a tape measure. And it's great because it's nice and long and it's flexible, so you can measure around things. Because you're scientists, it's important to be precise with your measurements. So be sure to measure from one end of an object to the other, like this. What if you don't have one of those measuring tools that I just mentioned? That's okay. That's the cool thing about measuring. You can use non-standard items around your house, like a pencil or even a paper clip, to do your measuring. Who knew that those could be measuring tools? When you're measuring with one of these non-standard kinds of tools, make sure that when you're moving your object, you move it from end to end with no gaps and no overlaps, so that you get a nice, precise measurement like we talked about before. When you do measure with a non-standard object and you go to record your data, you can say things like, "My rover traveled 3 pencils," or "My ramp was 15 paper clips long." You also have 2 handy measuring tools right on your body. Yep, your hands. You can use your hands to measure. But one really important thing if you decide to do that, if you use your hand and I use my hand, we're going to get a different measurement because our hands are different sizes. So, whosever hand you start with, use that hand the whole time so that your measurements will be precise. In addition to taking measurements when you're completing your rover and your ramp projects, you're also going to use some math problem-solving skills. Now, scientists like to draw pictures to solve problems. They can write number sentences to solve problems. And scientists love to make tables when they're solving problems. We can use this math problem as an example of our problem-solving skills. When I was looking for something to measure with, I found 3 boxes with 4 blocks in each box. How many blocks do I have altogether? Well, let's use our 3 different ways to solve this problem. The first way we'll solve this problem is by drawing a picture. So, I draw box number 1, box number 2, and box number 3. And then I put my 4 blocks in each box. Then I go back and I count my blocks. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. I have 12 blocks altogether that I can use to measure with. Or I can use a number sentence to solve my problem. I look at my blocks in the first box. I have 4 blocks, so I write my 4. Plus the 4 blocks in the second box, plus the 4 blocks in the third box. Now, I like to go back and count my blocks just so that I can be sure. That really helps me. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Look at that. 12 blocks that I can use to measure with. Same answer, but we did it 2 different ways. The third way we'll solve this problem is by using a table. Scientists love to use tables. So this is what my table looks like. And in this column, I write the number of boxes. Box number 1, box number 2, and box number 3. Then I go back and I'm going to start counting my blocks to add that number into my table, but we're going to do it a little differently. We're going to count on, and I'll show you how that works when we get there. So, in box number 1, let's count our blocks. 1, 2, 3, 4. Box number 1, let's put our number 4. Now we count on. We were at 4 blocks, so let's count on. 5, 6, 7, 8. So after box number 2, we now have 8 blocks. Let's count on one more time. We were at 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. So in all 3 boxes, we have 12 blocks. You got the same answer from doing your problem 3 different ways. That's pretty cool. Scientists solve problems, and math is the language that they use to do it. So, get ready, scientists. Let's do some math, solve some problems, and have fun. When you think like a scientist, you learn about the world around you. Let's think about ramps. Why are ramps so important to people? In my community, I use ramps at my grocery store. That way, when I'm pushing my cart down the sidewalk, I don't tip over my grocery cart and I don't get stuck. I've also seen people in wheelchairs using ramps to get up into buildings where there are too many stairs. I've even seen kids in my neighborhood riding their bikes over ramps that they built themselves. They looked like they were having so much fun. Look around your neighborhood. Do you see any ramps? Where do you see them? And why do you think those ramps might be important to people? When you build your ramp project, you're using different surface materials to create friction. Sometimes your object will travel easily across the surface, and sometimes it will be a little more difficult. It's like that for people all around the world. Imagine if you lived in the desert. How would you travel in all that sand? Or what about if you lived in the Arctic? Brr! All of that snow and ice would really make it difficult to get around. Or imagine that you're an astronaut and you just landed on a planet in outer space. You want to get out and explore the world around you, but you need a vehicle to do it in. Just like those engineers had to design and build a rover so that the astronauts could solve that problem and get out and explore other planets, you're doing the same thing when you build your rover. Who knows? Maybe your discoveries will take you out of this world someday. When you build your ramp and your rover project, you're going to use items that you find around your house. Did you know that by doing that, you're actually helping to save the earth? It's true. Reuse, recycle, and reduce. When you reuse items and recycle them into new items, you're reducing the amount of waste that you put out into the world. That just means that you make less trash, and too much trash is not good for the earth. Who knew that your ramp and your rover project were actually helping to save the earth? I looked around my house to find some items that I could reuse and recycle. Now, normally, I would finish the chips in this can, and I would just throw it away. But I got to thinking that it could really help me solve a problem that I have with all of my knitting needles. I need a place to keep them all in one spot, so I took that can and I covered it with some cool paper, and my knitting needles fit right in, all organized and ready to knit. I have another problem when I knit. My ball of yarn rolls all over the floor when I'm trying to finish my projects. So I found this tissue box that I thought would be perfect. Normally I'd throw it away, but my ball of yarn fits perfectly in the top. I pull my yarn out and I'm ready to go. No more chasing my ball of yarn around the house. Even after you've finished your ramp and your rover project, look around your house and your neighborhood for items that you can reuse and recycle so that we can reduce the amount of waste in our world. The earth will thank you for it. Hi friends, we're talking about a lot of things. Friction, force and motion, the science inquiry process, and the engineering and design process. Now, let's put all of that together as we design, build, and test our projects. Let's start with friction. The first thing you'll do is build a ramp. Now, a ramp is just a sloped plane that connects two different levels. I used a piece of cardboard and a stack of books to build my ramp, but you could use whatever you find around your house. Maybe you have some blocks that you could stack up or some boxes that you could stack. And for your slope, maybe you could use a piece of wood or even flip over a cookie sheet. That would work too. Now let's talk about friction. What I'd like you to do is look around your house for some materials that you think you would like to try and cover your ramp with so you can test the friction that it causes for your object. Here are a few things that I found. I found a plastic bag. It's kind of slippery, kind of crinkly, so I'd like to see how that affects my object as it rolls down the ramp. I found this rubbery mat. It's a little bit sticky and squishy, so that could be interesting to test. I found this nice piece of blue felt. It's kind of soft, so I'm not sure how that will affect how my object travels. I found this blue, rubbery, it's flexible, but it's pretty sturdy and squishy, rubbery mat that I can put on the surface of my ramp. And then I found some scratchy, rough sandpaper. I wonder what kind of friction that would create for my object as it travels down the ramp. So look around your house and see what cool things that you can find that you would like to test as you are working on your friction project. Now comes the math part. You're going to do some measuring. So you'll need to measure how long your ramp is and how wide your ramp is so that you know how much material you'll need to cover your ramp. You can use this diagram to help you as you're doing your planning. Once your ramp is complete, you'll need an object to test the surfaces of the 3 materials that you chose. Now, I chose a ball to test my ramp, but you can look around your house and find whatever you'd like. And you don't have to limit yourself to something round. You can use a block, you can use a toy car, you can use a lid from a container. There's no limit to what you can test and try. See what works for you. Once you have your object and your ramp completed, now you're ready for testing. So you'll take your object, you'll place it at the top of one of your surfaces, and you'll just release it. You're not going to push it, just let it go. Next, you'll measure how far your object goes. You're collecting data. So once you've done your first surface, you'll take your object, place it on your second surface, release it, and measure again how far your object goes on that surface. Then, finally, you'll place your object at the top of the third surface, release it, measure again, and record your data. Observe which surfaces had more friction and which ones had less friction. You might want to decide to even change it up a little bit and change up your surfaces and run your test again. See what you discover. Now let's talk about force and motion. For our project, remember you're going to build a rover out of items that you find around your house, and your rover is going to travel across the surface of another planet. So, you have to find your surface material again. It's okay to use some of the surfaces that you used for your ramp project, or I kind of went a little crazy. I went with something different. I found this moss, which to me looks bumpy and rough, like I would picture the surface of another planet to be. So I'm going to try this to test my rover. What are you going to try? When I design my rover, I'm going to pay particular attention to the wheels that I choose and the axle. Now, the wheels, you know, are the part that touches the ground and spins and helps your rover move. That axle is the piece between the wheels. And that's really important because if you're traveling over a bumpy surface, that axle needs to be able to move and bounce along with those wheels, or you might have some problems. So, think about your wheels and axles when you design and build your rover to go across your surface. Once you design and build your rover, you're going to test how far it travels across the surface of your planet. So this time, your surface is going to be flat, and you're going to use force and motion to make your rover move. Now, think about when my mom pushed me on that swing. That's what you're going to do with your rover. You're going to give it a push, and you're going to see how far it moves across the surface of your planet. Now remember, you're a scientist, so you'll collect some data. You'll measure how far it goes and record your data, and then share your discoveries with others. You may find that you need to modify or change your rover in order to get it to move, but that's okay. Remember, asking questions, making changes to make something better is all part of the engineering design process. So start designing and have fun.
To download the free lesson plans to be used with this program, visit us online at wqed.org/SOS. To request a hard copy of the lesson plans, please contact your local school district. Funding for this program is provided by the Pennsylvania Department of Education for Learning at Home.